Hello everyone, this is the Marvel Multiverse RPG core rulebook. Today we're going to be talking about how you can create your own powers in the Marvel Multiverse RPG. So there are actually a couple pages in the book dedicated just to explaining what it takes to make your own powers in the game. It's fairly straightforward. I will say they don't put a lot of restraint on what you can and what you can't do. The biggest thing that you need to remember is that any power that you create for this game is an unofficial power. And if you want to use that power in a session as a player, you need the express permission of your game's narrator. Please do not make up a power and then go into a session without telling your narrator and try to use your made up power. The narrator more than likely will say you can't do it. On the other hand, the book specifically states that if the narrator makes up a power, it's fair game. I mean, the narrator is the one who controls the whole universe. So the narrator is free to make up their own powers, allow their players to use the powers they make up, as well as to allow non-player characters to use the powers that they make up. So without further ado, let's hop in and take a look at what all you need in order to create your own power for this game. So the first thing that I want to point out is that you essentially build your own custom powers using the same format that's used for the powers that are already in the book. So every power is a part of a specific power set, has prerequisites, takes a certain action type. Some have a particular trigger. I don't think a trigger will always be needed necessarily. Has a particular duration, so how long the power lasts. Has a range, has a cost, and has an effect. So as long as you're getting all those bullet points down, you have like the basic framework for what your power is going to be made up of. Now let's look at these individual bullet points in more detail so that we can figure out exactly how you fill in those blanks. So first off, the power set. So you don't have to build your own custom power set from scratch, though the book says you can do that, albeit it's a lot more work. But you should list what power set your power best fits into. And if you feel like your power set doesn't fit into any of the existing power sets, you either need to create a new power set. They say that power sets have a minimum of 5 powers, but can have up to dozens of powers. But if you feel like it doesn't fit into an existing power set, nor does it deserve its own new power set, you can just put it as a basic power by default. Now, next up, we have prerequisites. So prerequisites are anything that your character should have first before they can select this power. So this could be other powers that your character would need to know in order to use this power. Think of them as like the individual components that make up the power that you're creating. So if you feel like the new power you're making is really like a combination of a bunch of different powers in this book, then set all those powers up as prerequisites for this power. But also prerequisites can involve traits. So you could say that there are certain traits that your character needs to have in order to utilize this power. Maybe the power has to do with being able to psychically create robots or something. Well, if you're going to be creating robots with your mind, maybe you'll need telekinetic manipulation in order to be able to move different parts around to piece them together to make the robot. But then you could be like, well, where's the material for the robot coming from? Well, maybe you don't only need telekinetic manipulation, maybe you also need elemental burst. Specifically with like an iron element. And that way, the way that the power works is like you fire out iron bits and then use telekinetic manipulation to like fit the different bits together. And maybe also you're zapping it with like electricity in order to like give it power. That's honestly like an interesting concept. I might make this power. But anyways, see how telekinetic manipulation and elemental burst are 2 powers that already exist in the game, and this new power essentially requires that you have both of those other powers in order to make it work. A trait that I would add as a prerequisite to that power would probably be Inventor. Inventor is a trait that's all about like building gadgets. So maybe as a prerequisite, you need to also be an inventor so that you actually have the knowledge base to be able to do it. It's one thing to be able to create the materials, it's another thing to be able to like telekinetically piece the materials together and power them with lightning, and it's another thing to actually know how you should fit the pieces together properly. So that trait shows that you have a certain engineering aptitude. And then rank as a prerequisite is interesting. So I would say the more powerful the effect of your power is, the higher the rank prerequisite should be. And again, this is like a hard one for me to like think about. Like to give advice, I would say if you think the power that you're trying to make is busted, then your rank prerequisite should probably be like rank 6, which is just like the highest rank in the game. If you don't think the power that you're making is particularly busted, just look through the book at the different individual ranks and how like rank 1 is like a rookie, rank 2 is someone who can protect like a neighborhood kind of thing. Try and scale your power to see whether or not the power's like street level, city level, nation level, cosmic, and then like pair that up with the appropriate rank for the prerequisite. That's my best tip for that. For power set, because I know I kind of like glossed over power set real quick, I do think that's kind of a complicated one, because even with the power that I just described, right? The power that I'm describing involves telekinesis and it involves element control. So where do you, like, what power set does it fit into? Would you say it's more of an element control power because you're using elements to create the materials and to power whatever you create? Or is it more of a telekinesis based power because it involves you using telekinesis to fit the pieces together? It almost feels like it's maybe a combination of both. You could argue it's a new thing. But if you feel like a power that's based around making gadgets or making robots should be like a general power, like something that anyone can have access to, you can just say it's a basic power. But to be honest, the power I'm describing might be something that's worth putting in its own power set. But that implies that you're likely going to create more powers in order to make it a fully fleshed out power set. I would say if you can't figure out what it falls into, maybe try and lean heavily toward whatever the prerequisite powers are in terms of like what type of power this is. Because I could just pick one of the two. I could say this is more of an elemental control ability because there are multiple aspects of it that involve elemental control. Or I can say it's more of a telekinetic ability because if you don't have telekinesis, you just can't do any of this stuff. And maybe you could argue that you're telekinetically manipulating like the atoms of materials around you to make metal or to cause interactions that produce electricity. You can flavor it to where it just fits into one of the power sets. Next up, your power needs to have an action type. So it can be a standard action, a movement action, or a reaction. A standard action is just what most actions in the game are. It takes up like your whole turn in order to do like a standard action. So in order to activate this power, let's say the gadget power that I'm describing, if it's a standard action, it would take up your whole turn to use this power to create a gadget. You essentially couldn't use this power to make a gadget and then immediately do something else with it. Your turn would pass, kind of thing. If it was a movement action, you'd expect it to have something to do with moving, like teleportation-based abilities or omniversal travel-based abilities, or even just like web swinging or flight, or like movement-based actions. So I would argue that this gadget action, unless you're like very quickly using this power to create some kind of vehicle that then like augments your movement ability, I wouldn't say that the power that I'm currently imagining would work with the movement action, but there are plenty that do, and I'm sure there are plenty that you can imagine that would also work as a movement action. And then, of course, there are reaction based abilities. Now, reaction based abilities are triggered, which, by the way, dun da da da, is the next category for powers that you create yourself. So, powers that use a reaction are normally triggered by something. And you can describe what that trigger is. You can either be super specific about it, or you can be a little vague about it. But the more vague you are, the more open to use your power becomes. If you get too specific, the power becomes extremely situational. If you get too general, the power is something that can be used all the time, whenever. So just make sure that you design the trigger for your power, if it is a reaction-based power, to work with what you're trying to do. And also, for the action, you can make it a combination of different things. So you can have a standard use of the power, a movement use of the power, and a reaction use of the power if you want to. You just need to make that clear in the power description. So don't think that you have to pigeonhole the power into just being standard movement or reaction. For example, with the gadget power, you could have a general gadget power where you create the gadget using a combination of your powers, and that's it. You can use a version of it that is based around movement, where you create like an impromptu vehicle and it like moves you, maybe out of the way of danger. That sounds like a reaction-based thing, which works well with the next part. It could be a reaction thing where you make some kind of gadget that can like move you around, kind of thing. Next up, duration. So duration determines whether or not the effect of your power is permanent, meaning once you've activated it, whatever is produced by it stays there. Whether or not it's instant, meaning whatever your power does happens in an instant and then it's like gone. And if you have a power that's like semi-permanent but not really, you can specify how many rounds the thing exists for and whether or not your character needs to concentrate in order to maintain it. Now let's use this for the gadget power, because this is actually really easy to apply to the gadget power. So if you want to have a power where you can create a gadget and that gadget is just like a permanent thing that your character can have. Let's say you're using it to build like a ray gun or something. If it's a permanent power, then that means that you activate this ability and whatever gadget you create, like a ray gun or whatever, you just keep that ray gun after that. If it's an instant power for the gadget creation, I guess you create a gadget that immediately does whatever it's supposed to do, and then afterwards it's gone. It doesn't last for any like given period of time. So if it's like I use the power to create a ray gun, maybe the description of power lets you like create and use the thing and then it like falls apart. Maybe because you're making it so quickly, in the heat of the moment, you're not able to actually maintain its structural integrity. Like you're holding it together with your telekinesis. It's not something that just like is perfectly welded together and just works kind of thing. So your gadget together, you get to like fire off the ray gun once and then the ray gun like falls apart kind of thing. So that would be an example of this power if it was like instant duration. Single round, honestly to me is very similar to the instant thing. I guess the only difference is you make the power on your turn. Let's say you make the ray gun, you fire it, and then once your turn comes back around, then the ray gun like dismantles itself or whatever, and you got to make a new one. Concentration is interesting. So concentration has to do with the rank of the character with the power. So if you're a rank 1 character, you can only concentrate on one concentration-based power at a time. But as your rank increases, so do the number of powers you can concentrate on. So a rank 2 character can concentrate on 2 powers at a time. A rank 3 character, 3 powers at a time. Where at rank 6, you hit a maximum of you can concentrate on like 6 different powers at a time, which is pretty crazy. So I would say for duration, concentration for this gadget power that I've been making as like an example, it would be a thing where you have to concentrate in order to maintain the structural integrity of whatever gadget you made. And if you break your concentration by switching to another concentration based power or by being knocked unconscious, there are many different ways you can lose your concentration on a power. It causes the little ray gun that you made to like automatically dismantle. It's like your telekinetic focus that was holding it together causes it to fall apart, kind of thing. And honestly, I think I like concentration for this psychic gadget power. That's my current working title for it. Like I said, I didn't come into this with a particular plan on making my own power, but I'm hoping that by doing so, I'm making it less confusing. By giving you an example, you can go like, oh, I see. You're not just hearing me read off what's in the book. You're actually like working with me in your head on how to like make this a real power. Or to helps you think through making your own power. So next up, range. So range is just how many spaces away your power can affect. Range is actually really interesting because range is the maximum distance that the power can be used without trouble, meaning you don't have to roll twice and take the worst roll. But don't think that the range is like the limit, because they can still go double the range. They just have like trouble on the roll. They have to roll twice and take the worst roll. So if you say that this gadget power allows you to make a gadget within like 5 spaces away from the character, this could be useful because let's use the ray gun example again. You could use the power to make a ray gun, but instead of making it right in front of you, you make it for your teammate who's 5 spaces away from you. So it like manifests right in front of your teammate. Your teammate can like grab the ray gun and start like using it in battle, which honestly, pretty cool. But let's say the teammate that's 5 spaces away from you is already like dual wielding swords. They don't need a ray gun. But the teammate that's 10 spaces away from you is unarmed and could really use assistance. You could use this gadget making power at that range of like 10 spaces away, but now you have to roll twice and take the worst roll. The action has trouble. So it'll be more difficult for you to try and form your gadget construct from this distance. But then if you had a teammate who was even 11 spaces away, you just wouldn't be able to do it. It's just like impossible kind of thing. Now, cost and prerequisite, I think, are like the hardest things to determine for these powers, if I'm being like 100% honest. Honestly, cost, prerequisite, and effect, I think, are all kind of the hardest ones, because to me, these are the real limitations of use for the most part. I'm not going to say that range isn't a big limitation, but there are some powers in this game that literally don't care about range as long as you and your target are like in the same dimension. So range for some powers already is just like a non-factor. It just doesn't matter, right? But cost and prerequisites and the effect kind of always matter in like a big way in order to try and keep your powers balanced. So if there's a cost to your power, because keep in mind, not all powers have a cost, it's often a focus cost. Now, the way that you calculate focus cost, and I'm so glad that they put this in, because it makes a rank prerequisite make it easier to determine how much a power costs. So if you have a rank prerequisite of, say, rank 4, you have to be a rank 4 character to use, then the focus cost would be rank minus 1 times 5. So for a rank 4 character, it would be 4 minus 1 times 5, which is just 3 times 5, which means a rank 4 prerequisite power normally has like a 15 focus cost to use. Now, this will really lock down your power so that people who aren't the proper rank can't use it. I know the surprising power trait in the game allows you to use powers that normally you don't fit the rank requirement for, but keep in mind that focus cost is a big deal, and there are still rules in the game that prevent you from spending more focus than 5 times your rank at a time. Meaning, even if you're a rank 1 character, if you use surprising power to get a rank 4 prerequisite power, you cannot spend 15 focus at one time in order to use a power. It just won't work. So cost is really going to act as a balancer to make sure that the power that you're making can't be used by people of a lower rank who shouldn't have access to the power. So really think through that. I will say use rank prerequisites to ensure that your power has the proper cost. Because even if you say that your super uber cosmic tier power is rank 6, if you don't have a solid cost for your like rank 6 power, someone just will use surprising power and use your rank 6 power at rank 1, which may lead to unintentional consequences. Next up, effect. What does the power do? Okay, so effect is pretty simple. It's really whatever you want. They don't give you a lot of guidelines on like what's a good effect for a particular rank. They recommend that you look through the powers in the book and try and make your power similar to the powers in the book. But of course, if you're making your own power, you feel like the book doesn't have a good example of what you want, because otherwise you would just slightly tweak an existing power and then just go with that. So what the power does is totally up to you. Just make sure that your costs and prerequisites and everything fit well with that. I would recommend that you require an action check for just any power that you make up, because it keeps a power from being a like I pay the cost and then I succeed kind of thing. So for the gadget creation power, I would argue that you need to complete a logic check. Now, they mention that there's a target number for if you're going to have it require like a check. Challenging is just kind of the default target number for trying to like figure out whether or not a check would succeed. I would say making the check be challenging is just like a safe thing. You can probably just like pick whichever ability matches with your power the most and say it's a challenging check, and you're probably fine. I feel like most players don't want a power that has a check that's like an absurd difficulty check, like the highest target number check in the game. You know, you could do that. You could make a power that's like rank 6. The prerequisite is that you have to have like a ton of other powers. It has a huge focus cost, and then it has an absurd like check to see if it passes. Maybe if you want to add like a wish power or something to this game, you would do something like that. But I think challenging is fair. I wouldn't really want to make a power that has a like difficult or ridiculous check. Also, if the power is meant to affect someone else, then the check is going to be against that individual's defense score for whatever ability type it is. For the gadget power, let's say you're building a gadget that's meant to restrain an enemy. Then you could say that the check is going to go against that enemy's like agility defense. Or I guess it could be like you do a logic check because you're using like psychic powers and you're like building a gadget, but then that check is going against their agility defense. So if you fail the check, it's as if you created the restraint gadget and then the enemy like dodged out of the way kind of thing. Also, a fantastic success. So fantastic success is actually like pretty interesting. That's when you roll 616, where the 1 is on the Marvel die and the other d6 both roll a 6. This is supposed to be like a supercharged version of the power. You lucked out and the power worked way better than it normally does. For the gadget creation power that I've been playing around with for this video, let's say you end up building 2 of the gadgets rather than just 1. So for the ray gun example, you build 2 ray guns. And let's say it's concentration based. So as long as you concentrate, both ray guns stay active in the game. And they do damage equal to like a pistol. Build weapon or like psychic weapon could be like the whole concept of the power. And then for the stats, you use the weapon stats that already exist in the book. You're like psychically summoning elements and telekinetically like putting them together in order to build different weapons that then can be like used by yourself or your allies as long as you maintain concentration. See? Like, it's really easy once you get it to work through everything to be like, okay, here, this is the power. I did it. I do have some recommendations, by the way. The more I've been talking through it in the video, the more I think I kind of understand setting prereqs and everything. Because, like I said, I think that's personally the hardest part. Finding ways to limit your power in a way that's fair. So I highly recommend make the prerequisites for your power essentially the other powers that make up your power. Like how I said, elemental burst and telekinetic manipulation are essentially what the character's doing. They're making the parts by firing out the elements, telekinetically fusing them together, and then doing another elemental burst in order to like charge their creation with electricity. Because you essentially need those other powers to do this, you set those as prereqs. And then if those powers have a rank prerequisite, I would say pop that rank prerequisite onto this so that now it's essentially not going to ever be unbalanced from those other powers, if that makes sense. Like if some of the power prerequisites for your new power are like rank 3 or rank 4, just pick the highest rank out of those powers and say that your power also has that rank prerequisite, and you're probably safe. And then after that, you can just say that for the focus cost, you take that rank prerequisite and just use the standard formula. And then boom, you have like a good focus cost. So I would say definitely do try to build your powers in a way to where it's a combination of multiple existing powers being used in a way that you normally can't use them in the game to do something fresh and new. And make sure that if you do build a power, that you include all of these different bullet point categories, that you present this power to your narrator, and that your narrator gives you the green light, because as long as they're cool with it, it's fine. Anyways, I've been rambling on for too long. What are your thoughts on how to create a power in the Marvel Multiverse RPG? Let me know in the comment section below. This, I believe, is all on page 285 of the core rulebook. So if you want to read all this yourself, feel free to just flip over to that page. I'm trying to confirm that now real quick, just to make sure that I'm not lying to you guys. This is on 286. Sorry, my memory was like a little bit off. So page 286 of the core rulebook has all of the instructions on how to make your own power. Anyways, thank you all for watching. This is your host, your friend, your boy, Jet Black, logging out. Peace, guys. Check it out.